So I think we'll get started. Welcome, everybody. My name is Mary Coakley, and I'm the Community Engagement Manager here in Unit 18, which is a unit that just opened in the last year and a half. Trinity trying to be more civically engaged, looking out beyond the gates and recognising that that's not something we have been great at doing and we want to get better at doing. So this place is being used by a range of local community groups and residents, everybody from, St. Andrew's Youth Group to residents groups, and Extinction Rebellion have an art group on a Wednesday evening, so you're welcome to join them if you want, I'm sure. We also have, academics coming to talk, and, it's not about formal education, it's about informal, it's about people getting to know each other locally. So, this week is Trinity's Green Week. In fact, it's the 21st anniversary, 21st year we've had it. And when the Provost opened it with Mary Robinson on Monday in the Trinity Business School in Tangent, she said, I hope we get to a stage where we don't need a Green Week, really, that, the awareness and action will have been taken so that we won't celebrate having a week. It's something that's just part of us. And funnily, coincidentally, the launch of that actually coincided with, as you all probably know, the publication of the IPCC report, which of course indicated, the 1.1 degree rise since pre-industrial levels, global temperature warming, and unless we take immediate and profound actions, that will likely go beyond 1.5 by mid-decade. So, and what they said actually was that climate, ecosystems and society are interconnected. Effective and equitable conservation of approximately 30 to 50% of the Earth's land, freshwater and ocean will help ensure a healthy planet. And tonight it's our oceans and coastlines that will be the focus of this conversation. And we've three contributors, as well as our chair, Duncan Stewart, who all are passionate about protecting our oceans and waters for very different reasons. And they're from very different backgrounds, but share that passion. And I'm sure that'll come across in the conversation. I'll let Duncan ask more about them. But just as an introduction to our panel, so Duncan is chairing, as I'm sure you all recognise. He's a well-known Irish architect, environmentalist and media personality, and has worked on EcoEye for, did you say 21 years? Did I hear you say?
EcoEye 21 years.
20, coinciding with Trinity's, but unfortunately, yes, as you all know, very disappointed to see that is no longer going ahead. But so Nina McGowan is a visual artist, climate activist, and world champion in free diving.
Thank you.
And she combines her interest in, climate with her work as an artist, and she'll talk more about that. Zoe Roseby, Dr. Zoe Roseby, is a postdoc researcher in sea level change at Trinity, and she led a Creative Ireland action or project called Línta na Farraga. There are images both of Nina diving and Zoe's Línta na Farraga, which were visual installations of light indicating sea level rise across Ireland. And Siobhán Regan is the Education and Outreach Officer with the Irish Whale and Dolphin Group, who have campaigned also around marine protected areas. And her main goal this year is to create a support network between members, especially with local groups. So look, I'll stop talking now. You want to hear more from these experts, and don't forget, we do have some wine, and it'd be great if you stay for a drink and some food afterwards and just chat and get to know more people. So I'll hand you over to Duncan.
Thanks, Mary, and I must say thank you all for coming. It's great that you're giving time for this, because it's a very important discussion here tonight, and really appreciate that you're all here, and look forward to your questions and lots of dialogue, and let's hope that we come out of this meeting, all of us, with more knowledge and more information on issues concerning climate change and our oceans. So troubled waters is going to be something that hopefully we look back at and say, well, this was an important event, and register something with us that is going to be helpful for us throughout our future lives. But before I go to my distinguished panel here of three wonderful women that have great things to say, just to kind of put a context of this, we're talking about our oceans and climate change. And that means we're really talking about greenhouse gases, because it's greenhouse gases that affect our oceans, and that likewise affects our climate system. But our oceans have a major effect on our climate system, and our climate system then, in turn, has major effects on what can happen on our oceans with storm surges and with hurricanes and with all the other impacts. And obviously, as we warm the climate system, we get more sea level rise. But likewise, with the CO2 that we put into our atmosphere, about 30% of that is absorbed into the oceans and is acidifying our oceans. So we have all these issues, to consider. And then, of course, all of our rivers coming from our land masses all flow into the oceans, bringing with it, plastics and microplastics and chemicals and nutrient runoff from farmland. So these are all issues, but they all end up in the oceans and in the atmosphere. And of course, our biosphere is incredibly affected by all of this. So big issues. I think putting it in context, over 90% of the excess heat that's trapped in our atmosphere from our greenhouse gas emissions, over 90%, I think it's about 93% in fact, is absorbed into the oceans. And when you think of that massive store of heat that's being absorbed into the oceans, which responds very slowly, it's got a massive inertia, if you like, but that's what's going to really bring the big impacts of climate change as we move further into the century. And on top of that, the acidification caused by our CO2 that's being dissolved in our oceans, forming carbonic acid, is affecting our biosphere. And obviously, we'll be talking about all of these issues. So just setting the scene, we're talking about a very big issue. And of course, Ireland is an island surrounded by the sea. And our coast is very vulnerable to a lot of what we've got, including here in this part of Dublin, very exposed to what's coming down the track. So let's start with Nina, I should say. Nina, tell us now about what you have. We know that you have won the World Championship in free diving. Mm-hmm. And tell us about that before I go on.
So I competed representing Ireland at the World Championships of free diving, and I set a new world record for no fins diving in the masters category, age 50 to 54. So I had been, I only actually started in 2020. I did my first course, but I'd been doing, for my 40th birthday, I gave up the boozing, the fagging, started.
And you never
started yoga.
Yeah.
It was a 40th birthday present to myself. I've been very interested in the body as an instrument to gauge, and I love music and dancing. I love feeling the environment around me and responding back to it. So I didn't want to lose these things, my ability. In fact, I wanted to refine it. So for the past 10 years, I've been looking at diet, using myself, trying to fine-tune how I negotiate with my lived environment. And that was coming out through my artwork, kind of looking at consciousness through the body as an instrument. So it's kind of biocentric approach to making installation artwork. And basically the freediving was kind of a part of that. So I found it really interesting to be underwater where there was no detritus of our culture, no language, nothing. And I think that's representative of the type of deep systemic change that's necessary to shift mindset out of the way we are at the moment. So that's a little bit convoluted. How did I get into freediving?
Yeah. And by the way,
that's how.
let's go back to your diving first, just to kind of, where did you do this competition, and what sort of depth did you get down to, and how long were you down there?
Yeah, so
it must have been incredibly clear.
Like, it was quite strategic. I knew what I was doing all year. I was going to try and break the record. That was 40 meters in no fins diving.
43 meters.
Well, I did 43. I had been doing 48 in training.
That's now we're talking about nearly 6 atmospheres pressure.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, what's that
Yeah,
like for
what's it like?
start? I mean, I did scuba diving, and
Yeah.
in fact, I did one dive, 50 metres,
Yeah.
of skelligs. You know,
Yeah,
this is going back a
beautiful.
long time.
Absolutely
But
beautiful.
mind you, after it, I had ear problems for weeks after.
So
Incredibly bad ear.
your Frenzel technique, or what you use on a plane to equalize your ears, it fails after about 25 to 30 meters. So you have to basically bring up air and use your cheeks like a squirrel and close your glottis.
Right, okay.
So you kind of bring up as much air as you possibly can hold in your cheeks. And as you descend further, the pressure is acting on that airspace, and you use your tongue to push up against your hard palate to force that pressure to keep your eustachian tubes open. That's
And you also
more
have to stay down
complicated.
to get down there. That takes
Yeah.
time to get down.
Well, you do it all real quick. That's the skill.
Yeah, but how quickly? I mean, you're talking about
Well, as quick as you can.
Minutes.
Well, no, once I get to neutral, so I'm wearing a small amount of weight, I will kind of breaststroke down, do the frog down. I have a nose clip because I can't obviously put my hand up to my nose to equalize against it, so I wear a nose clip to keep the pressure. At about 15, 20, I'm sinking, so I just stay very loose and soft.
You've
It's very
weights- you've
yin,
weights,
yeah,
yeah.
and I allow the pressure to act on my body, and I respond to the increasing pressure with these maneuvers to manipulate the air spaces in my body.
And what about the feeling of panic that must
No,
arise?
no, you have to mitigate against that. So
How do you manage that? You know, you're down there. If you go up quickly, you could have all sorts of
I'm
things.
concentrating on technique. It does, when I'm in a competition scenario, I've got depth gauges. I know when to top up my mouth fill. That's the squirrel thing.
Right.
When the turn is coming.
And would you have had any
yeah.
kind of time
Moments.
down there where you felt scared or felt, you know?
No, the competition scenario is quite specific, and I'm quite trained into how long it's going to take me down and up and all the rest. But when I'm out just snorkeling on the reef, it's been funny. I've seen some funny things. I thought one time I was looking out, I could see this black dark shape, and it was somewhere between the surface and the bottom, and it was kind of slowly coming towards me.
Like
At a
big-
distance,
big
so I just
jellyfish.
stopped. I didn't know what it was. I was like, shit, I can see this thing. Can it see me? I'm in trouble. I better just not move. I didn't know quite what to do, but it was enormous and it was very shadowy. I thought it was like an inflated kind of a whale. I couldn't really figure out what it was, but as it came closer, I realized this thing is covered in barnacles and it's got cleaner fish or something traveling with it. And then I realized it was a black plastic bag that was there underwater that long. It was created its own ecosystem. So that was the scariest thing. Like, I haven't had any other spooky.
Did that lead you in any way with your art or with your work generally to focus on
Well, that's
on
kind
erosions
of
and
why
damage?
I'm now working with Sea Shepherd Ireland down here. I got majorly involved when I came back after my first.
Where's that?
These guys.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
And also how I got involved with Trinity and Rising to see what we could do to try to get more people on board, because it's astounding what I've seen and the experiences I've had, how beautiful it is, and I'm very worried that we're losing this. So I've been motivated to see what I can do.
How
to
worried
share.
are you, by the way? I mean, what's happening is so serious. How do you feel?
I can't take on board the weight and the scale of the thing. For me, to try to cultivate a more intimate relationship with our environment means I'm an advocate now, and if I can encourage more people to be in the water, then by virtue of that experience, they also become advocates. So I think we just need to build on being out there, not necessarily swimming in the water, but being in forests, getting rid of capitalism out of our processed food, out of the way we interact with have a more primal interaction with the environment. So that
And if you take all the pressures on our oceans now today, you mentioned the plastic issue. There's all the nutrient runoff from our farmland and from sewage, etc. Doing massive damage. There's obviously the melting rate of ice. There's multiple issues. Then there's the storm surges or the hurricanes that are developing as sea surface temperatures increase, and obviously more evaporation of water, creating more heavy torrential rain situations. Of all these pressures, and I've left out biodiversity and all the aquatic species that are suffering, where do you fit into all of these? Which one is the most scary for you?
well, I'm no expert on climate change. I'm just one atom in one of those species, and we're all impacted. For me, I work through art.
Yeah.
So art has no language. Again, it comes outside of our structures. And as I said before, if we can find a way to get people to respond in different ways to the issues at stake, because it's starting to become habituated now. People are getting complacent, and it's too big and too burdenful to try to deal with. So I'm trying to find different ways to motivate people towards action.
To evoke them into a situation.
Exactly, and I think that's one of art's roles.
Yeah.
You know, and as
Yeah.
we were speaking earlier, that it's to touch people in ways that language hasn't in the past.
And are you focusing all of your artwork in this area now?
I'm working between the land and the sea, because I'm between
Yeah.
the land and the sea.
Yeah. And does it still allow you time to train for diving?
Not at the moment, but I come back to that. But yeah, I mean, yoga, the keeping the body as an instrument that can respond and that's ready to react, you know, is really important.
When you're down there, by the way, those moments down there, a few minutes, I presume, you're talking about, you know, where are your thoughts when these issues kind of confront you? How do you feel down there about these pressures that human species are putting on?
I don't think about.
You don't?
Don't think about the. I think about how beautiful it is when you can see out and you have these brief moments of what I call awe that will stay with you for the rest of your life. There's no sound. It's kind of what I said. It's kind of like standing in front of a colour field, like Rothko or a painting, where all you see around you. There's nothing of our culture, or there isn't even the metronome of your breathing to bring you back. You can lose yourself, but it's just so astoundingly beautiful that imprints internally on you, and you keep that as an intimate moment of you engaging with your space that stays forever. And then if I can bring that, talk to you guys about it, then maybe it encourages you to become in the same way connected. So that's me underwater.
Well, that's really interesting, you know, and, you know, I must say, it's great that you are bringing it into your art and that you've been so successful. I mean, world champion.
World record holder.
World record holder on top of that, you know. Like, it's just incredible that somebody with that has taken on this issue and that you're trying to bring it out to the wider public. You know, thank you for all of this.
Thank you.
And I'm sure there's going to be lots of questions from the floor but I think we should move now to our second speaker, Zoe, who's from Cornwall. Zoe, I think.
Hi everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. I'm from Cornwall, from the southwest of England. So I suppose I've been interested in the ocean.
Where's England, by the way?
Pardon?
Where's England?
Where is it? So yeah, I've been interested in the ocean all my life, really.
Well, you're surrounded by it.
Absolutely. Yeah, very much like being from, we have that connection to the ocean. You spend a lot of time by the sea as a kid on the beach. So yeah.
And you're now focusing your art on basically rising sea levels.
Yes. So
particularly that topic.
Exactly. So I'm a researcher at Trinity College Dublin. I work in the geology department researching historic sea level change in Ireland. So that's kind of my day job, is doing kind of data around sea level change. Last year I had the opportunity to work with two Finnish artists, Timo Aho and Pekka Nietzschevirta, on a project that was funded by the Creative Island Action Fund. So we received funding to work with 3 different local authorities, installing light installations that show people the storm surge heights of the future in their local areas. So the idea was to kind of make untangible data tangible. So you kind of get numbers thrown at you, data thrown at you. You don't really know what that kind of means. So it allows people to kind of just really see what are the impacts in my local area on the environment, on the infrastructure, on the heritage of our coastlines.
Right.
Yeah.
And can you describe these installations that you've done?
Yes, so
where they are.
Yeah,
yeah,
of course. So there are 3 sites, Galway, Wexford, and also in Dún Laoghaire. So in Dún Laoghaire, we have in Williamstown a Martello Tower. There's the Spanish Arch in Galway, and then those are our 2 kind of heritage sites. We are also working in Wexford Town. There's kind of a 3-part installation at the John Barry Memorial Statue and on the promenade as well. So in each location, you'll just see it's like one horizontal line of LED lights that's calculated by finding a historic storm of the past. So we would find the elevation of the historic storms in a local area, and would add on to that a sea level rise projection of the future to find a storm surge height in the year 2100 or the year 2150. They're powered by solar panels, so we could kind of really show that we really wanted that connection to be there, that it's a project about the climate, and we are kind of doing our bit to make sure that it's being powered in a renewable way and that there's energy being fed back into the grid.
And, obviously sea level rise is creeping up slowly, but it's accelerating.
Yes.
And it's on a rapid acceleration, obviously, as the melt rate increases of our ice. But the storm surge that you mentioned there, how do you base your kind of figures on projections of what's coming down the track with storm surges? Because they'll come from suddenly with a hurricane, and they can be devastating. So how do you deal with that?
Absolutely. Storm surges is increasing storms actually, as kind of far as making projections is concerned, is one of the things that's a bit more tricky. So the temperature and the sea level rise projections, people make those estimates and those scenarios with kind of medium to high certainty. The storms is trickier because I think it's just I'm not a storm expert, but the kind of processes that come together to produce storms, there's a lot more uncertainty there. But what people are sure about is that sea levels are rising. We're going to get storm surges more frequently because we won't need to have such a big storm to get to the levels that we're already seeing. And then not only that, the big storm surges that we already have would be far more impactful. They would travel much further inland and reach much higher elevations. So they're the things that really, I think, looking kind of medium term, it's those storm surges that kind of have the damage. Because like you say, the sea level is kind of silently kind of creeping up. And then it's when we kind of experience these winter storms that we're going to see those at higher frequency. And that's what has the kind of economic and environmental impacts. Also looking at things like coastal erosion, like we've been working in Wexford, and that's something that when you speak to members of the public down there, that comes up all the time. People within their lifetimes are seeing the coastline actively retreating, on a year-by-year basis. So that kind of thing.
I was down in 2 weeks ago. I was down in Castle Gregory, and all that Maries area, and the people living there, they're living in an area that won't be there in this century.
Yeah.
Their farms and their houses will be gone.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's very difficult to bring that subject up with people in that area. They're aware of this. It's amazing how they can cope with that, because they've been brought up in this area for generations probably, and wonderful kind of growing conditions there for vegetables down in the Maries, and all of this is going to be gone this century. It's very, very.
Yeah, it's sad, and there's a kind of a term we've been like playing. Well, the term is like solastalgia. It's like the loss of your feeling, this like emotional loss of your natural surroundings. And I think making space for people to really almost like grieve the nature that they will lose in the future is important. Like, we're all, our local places are really precious to us. Like we have lots of memories there, and not only that, but then it also looking on like a property side value. I think making space to like, and having kind of places where you can talk about the emotions of climate change is obviously quite important.
Yeah, something on that. I spoke to the local school, the second level school. You said it is what, 16, or sorry, how many students were there? No, I think it was only 400 in that school, students. But their concern about these issues are huge. I mean, I'm giving talks to schools because I set up a thing called Eco-Ed for All, which is really to empower teachers with information about environmental issues and the pressures of climate change and biodiversity loss and, air pollution, water, all of these issues. And, there's a movement around the country. But, schools, I'm finding, kids in fourth year, are incredibly concerned about these issues. And they're starved of information. The teachers want to know more. And, but what I mean is just that generation we need to focus on. That, anyone here from Trinity College now, obviously students here, how many would we have from Trinity here? Yeah, okay. Like, how do you feel about your future with these sort of topics? And am I kind of frightening you with some of the things I'm bringing up here?
I suppose the question you put to Nina is, have you frightened some politicians or local councillors who have seen the light installation?
Yeah, that's a good point.
The local representative would go, well, I won't have anyone to
Yeah.
That's a really good question, and something that comes up, often enough, and something we thought about when we planned the project. I think we worked with the local authorities, so that's like the first thing. We worked with the climate teams within each of our, like Galway City Council, Dunleary, Rathdown, and Wexford. So we were already involved with the kind of local authorities and the climate action teams that they have. And then it's not a scaremongering project, because what we're showing, one thing I was going to say before about the storm surge is that storm surges are very, I said that they're kind of harder to predict what's going to happen. So rather than using storms of the future, we used a historic storms that already took out some uncertainty. We were like, we know that the water level got here before, and actually a lot of people, for example, in Wexford, have very vivid memories of those flooding events, as I'm sure people are here that would remember flooding in Clontarf in the last kind of 20 years. So that already takes out some uncertainty, and then we have the sea level projections, and then we just say, it's based on the latest scientific data. It's not designed to be dystopian. Unfortunately, these are actually quite realistic, middle-of-the-road scenarios. I think that when we come and talk about this project, it shouldn't be the first time, people have thought, if you're living right by the coast and it's very low elevation, it's obviously very scary, but I also would hope that this isn't the first time that they've thought about the future of their land and coastal land. So it does come up often, and it is scary, and I really appreciate that when I speak to people who are living in coastal communities, because there is a lot to get your head around with these topics. Yeah.
And if you apply that same question to this area, of Dublin, in fact, all the coast of Dublin Bay, in the second half of this century, as sea level rises, but as storm surges become more intensive, which is what's happening. There was a very big report on it from NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration in the US, that brought this really very in-depth study of what's happening in the North Atlantic with increasing storms coming up from the Azores and now heading up along our coast. Like we had it with Ophelia, but these are what's coming down the track, And these will come up Dublin Bay, they'll come up the Irish Sea, basically, around the coast and into Dublin Bay. And, the implications of all of this, quite serious for all of the people around this. 40% of our population is living within 5 kilometres of the coast.
Yeah.
And that's a frightening sort of figure, isn't it?
It is, and you're right. You look at flooding maps of Dublin, and then the areas around Dublin Port and Sandymount get, pulled up. Every time you run through a different scenario, year 2100, mid-range, obviously then you get higher. These areas come through, and then that flooding extends depending on which scenarios you pick. And I'd recommend the floodinfo.ie website if you want to check out these scenarios for yourselves. They are really useful to see the kind of limits of that extension. And a lot of the land around here was reclaimed at one point from the ocean. So there's also something, we already know it's low elevation. It was once at sea level. It's been reclaimed. They will become some of the first kind of places to be sort of taken back by sea level change.
Yeah. And of course, all of this is to do with our greenhouse gas emissions. If we want to stop this, we have to stop burning fossil fuel. We have to change our agricultural system away from cattle. These are things we have to do, but we're in denial. And do you think that our politicians are reacting to this at all? Are they alerting us to what's coming down the track?
In terms of like you say, it's greenhouse gas emissions and these scenarios we're looking at aren't set in stone yet. So there's that certain level of mitigation that we can all.
We can do to stop this.
Yes,
reduce
exactly.
It.
Yeah. So there's the mitigation aspect. So we don't have to have the worst case scenario. We can reduce our greenhouse gas emissions to avoid the worst case scenarios when it comes to sea level change. In terms of when we go out and we talk to people about climate action, I think we're all quite familiar now with the same actions that we get told over and over again: ride your bike, change your diet, and these things. And I think in terms of where we can get involved with politics is making our concern heard, and really, our in here TDs and the UK MPs, letting them know that we care about the environment is really important. And I hope that it would become higher up on the agenda, because certainly right now it isn't being treated like an emergency.
No. And the problem is that when it comes to elections, we elect an awful lot of our politicians that just don't get it. And they, in fact, some are in denial. There's some down in Kerry that are actually, totally. I actually mentioned it when I was down in Kerry at a public meeting I was giving about certain politicians that in the Kerry area that actually don't even believe in climate change. And or they call it something, an act of God, you know. And I mean, this is going on in our country. So we have these issues, you know. And, you know, when you think of Ireland, we're incredibly out of line. Our emissions are 50% above the European average per person compared to the European average per person. So we're way out of line with Europe. We're the laggards of Europe with our greenhouse gas emissions. And our agriculture, of course, is a huge part of it. But our transport emissions increased massively. If we think of going back to 1990, when we were to have reduced all our emissions by 20% by 2020, our total greenhouse gas emissions went up by 12%. Across all of Europe, including the UK, across the EU and UK, Norway, Switzerland, all of that, 550 million people, they managed to bring down their greenhouse gas emissions by 24%. Ours went up by 12%. But where did transport go in Ireland? Anyone just want to throw a figure? Just to kind of put in context. If everything went up by 12%, I know I've gone off subject here, but just to put it in context, what's our transport doing? Because if we are to kind of identify what the problems are, we need to know what's causing things, why our emissions are so high. So it's a shocking figure, okay? That's why I brought it up. Somebody throw a figure. If everything went up by 12% in Ireland, and all of Europe went down by 24%, what do you think happened with transport in Ireland? 25? Another one? Take another one?
80.
What?
80.
80. Now we're getting somewhere?
Really?
Yeah. Any more? 100%. Now that's a lot, isn't it? 100% means double, okay? Instead of reducing by 20%, it doubled. But that's not the figure either. Any one more?
500.
What?
500.
Which?
500%.
Yeah, that's 100%, but no, more than that. 153%,
Oh, God.
which is 2.5 times. Our airline flights went up over 3 times. Our freight transport went up by over 3 times.
What was the period again?
So our transport is incredibly out of control. Anyway, I'm just bringing it up in the context because all of this affects our oceans. It affects climate change. You know, what it means, we can't leave out the root causes of the problem, you know? So anyway, this is really interesting, and I think I'm probably I'm talking too much here.
Yeah, I'd say just on that side about kind of we talk about mitigation, I think one thing that's important to bring in terms of sea level change is also the coastal adaptation. So by 2100, we already have locked in around 0.5 metre of sea level rise because we've already burnt greenhouse gases that are warming our atmosphere, and these processes kind of take a long time to kind of see through. So I think in terms of sea level change, it's like engaging with the mitigation, but also increasingly engaging with that kind of coastal adaptation piece as well is kind of all I'd add to that kind of engagement side of things.
Yes, absolutely. So really interesting, and you know, doing art in this area and it could be music, it could be paintings, obviously art, but you know, physics. You know, it could be poetry. It could be so many forms of art to kind of evoke these issues. You know, we did in our revolutions in the past use art and music to evoke, revolutions to happen. You know, here we are in a situation where we need a revolution. You know, we're in a state of disaster. You know, if we want to protect this young generation in the room here, we have to change fundamentally everything we do, and we're not doing it. So anyway, maybe we'll come back to that in a more general discussion. So over to Siobhán for next, and thank you, by the way, Zoe, that was great. And you know, you're from Loughrea, I think, Zoe?
I am, yeah. I'm from
Siobhán,
Galway
sorry.
original. I'm from Galway originally, yeah.
Okay, from Galway City.
No, from Loughrea, East Galway. So I actually didn't grow up directly beside the sea. I actually come from a sheep farming background, from a very small subsistence sheep farming background. Which
And now you're talking about whales and dolphins. That's a big difference.
And now I'm talking about whales and dolphins, and that's, you know, I think as Nina was speaking about, that she doesn't have any negative thoughts when you're in the water. You're just completely at peace. And I really associate with that as well, because I find absolute solace in our environment, whether that be in a forest or particularly in the marine environment. But yeah, so I come from a farming background, but Ireland is an island nation, so no one is too far from the water, which I think is quite privileged as well. Yeah.
And by the way, I'm not criticising farmers.
Oh,
They're
yes.
not responsible. The problem is our government policy is what the problem is. And it's guided by vested interests, big meat barons, exporters, big dairy industry influencing government policy. And the farmers are like the pawns for the slaughter. So, farmers want to do the right thing.
It's a really interesting point, actually, and I was glad that you brought that up, and especially that land-to-sea connection, because I speak with a lot of the fishing community, and coastal outreach, but coming from a farming background, farmers, and I think particularly subsistence farming in Ireland, that it's generational. There's a cultural heritage there. They are the biggest advocates for our environment that I know of. And it's the same with the fishing industry. In Ireland, we have such a cultural heritage and connection to our environment in totality, not just the marine or not just the land, in general. And I think we really need to get back to that, and I think slowly we are. It's negative. It can become very overwhelming, I think, when you look at climate change and you look at lots of figures and data. And the data is incredibly important, but it isn't too late. I'm a marine biologist. My area of expertise are large megafauna like whales and dolphins, seabirds. And I love top predators like whales and dolphins because they're a bioindicator species. So by looking at whales and dolphins, we get a really good overview of the rest of the ecosystem and how it's doing. And, there's a lot of nuances to it, but in general, things are not as bad as they appear.
Oh, good.
If you take humpback whales, for example, a very large whale that a lot of people might know of because they're the ones that jump out of the water. So our numbers of humpback whales in Irish waters is increasing. Humpback whales, and indeed a lot of species of whales, were decimated in whaling times through hunting. And it's only just now, literally in the last 3 years, we're starting to see these numbers to increase again to, into the hundreds, which is really impressive.
And is it only in Ireland this is happening, or
no?
is it happening globally?
It's happening globally.
Okay.
But it's interesting because from a climate point of view, we have to ask ourselves these questions. We're now seeing humpback whales in places that we have not seen them in, the last 50 years. For example, Donegal Bay along the Sligo coast, even in Galway. 20 odd years ago, they would have focused in Cork and Kerry in particular. That's where they would have fed. But now we're seeing these numbers increasing in Irish waters. We're seeing them, we think, return to Donegal Bay, which is really positive. But on the other hand, if you wanted to take a negative approach, you could look at common dolphins. Common dolphins are a beautiful species, and they're a relatively small dolphin. And they used to be pelagic, so that means that they were offshore living. You wouldn't see them in coastal waters up until about 2011. And now we are seeing them coastally. Even this year, only 2 months ago, there were large numbers of common dolphins in the Shannon Estuary in County Clare. These pelagic offshore species were found in an estuary.
And that's completely unusual.
That is unusual. It's why are they there? And they're there, we think, because they're chasing food, they're chasing prey, which is the prey distribution of fish is shifting with climate change, with water temperatures. So even though it's
Traveling north, is it?
Yeah. So it's a good story for the humpback whales. They're returning after being hunted for several years. Their numbers are increasing. That's a really good sign in the ecosystem for the likes of zooplankton and, smaller sprat and that.
Yeah.
So that's, but then the dolphins eat a completely different thing. They eat forage fish. And the forage fish, their distribution is moving with climate change.
And they're diminishing,
And they're not they're not diminishing as such.
Okay.
They're just changing. So we're seeing fish moving towards Iceland on their migration now earlier on in the year than they would have before. We are seeing fish moving into more coastal waters where before there would have been offshore upwelling areas with lots of productivity. So, 15 years ago, we wouldn't have seen common dolphins from the land. Now it's a frequent occurrence. They're one of the most frequently seen species.
But if you take all the pressures, overfishing as one, obviously, but then you take on issues of, say, the runoff of nutrients from land and its impacts on the seas. You take the plastic issues and how it's getting in now into the bloodstream and the brains of all species. I mean, it's everywhere.
I don't think there's any species, humans included, that doesn't
But I mean, you're getting
have
all these pressures, and then of course you've got the
microplastics in their blood.
acidification of the oceans happening with how do you deal with all these things, and how is the whale and dolphin group looking at these issues?
So how we deal, and I'm glad you brought up ocean acidification, because I'd like to go back to the good news story of those great whales like the humpback whales. Whales, they're top predators, okay? They're a good indicator of the health of the whole ecosystem. But large whales like this are actually carbon sinks also. So they accumulate carbon dioxide in their blubber like giant swimming trees. And a lot of these great whales, like humpback whales, are quite long-lived. They also help mix up the water column to spread nutrients, which is great because it kickstarts the food chain. And of course, phytoplankton are like the plants of the sea. So they also absorb carbon dioxide. But the more great whales we have, like humpback whales, the more they're capturing that carbon, the more they're mixing up that water column. But also, they're big whales, so they have to eat a lot. And when you eat a lot, you have to poo a lot. And when they poo, they release these amazing nutrients that also helps kickstart the food chain and help phytoplankton and zooplankton grow again, which in turn captures more and more and more carbon dioxide. So I think there's a positive spin that you could take, that we are seeing more of these great whales returning in stronger numbers every year. Because the more great whales we have, the more phytoplankton and zooplankton we have. It's a little bit counterintuitive, but the more we are taking out carbon dioxide, therefore slowing down that heating system, that ocean acidification system.
But the acidification is happening at a greater rate.
It's happening at a greater rate, but my point really is that if we act now, and I'm glad you also mentioned politics, because in Ireland we are starting now to look at marine protection and our environmental legislation, which historically Ireland are brutal at. But they're starting to do that now. If they went a little bit faster and had boots on the ground, it'd be better off. But the fact that we're starting this marine protected area measures, okay, if we can create ecosystems that support big megafauna like the great whales, like that really encourages this growth, that supports the whole ecosystem, we can actually slow things down. I
Something,
think,
by the way, came up in our chat earlier was the hope spots that are happening across the world.
yes,
And then the greater Skelligs coast.
yeah.
Tell me about that, because it tells, I think that's a really interesting thing that's happening down in Kerry, and I
Yeah.
believe it goes all the way up to Loop Head, does it?
It does. So again, all of the main marine environmental NGOs, non-governmental organisations like the Irish Whale and Dolphin Group, a few years ago now, we all got together because we recognised this need for change, and that the time is now for change. And we came up with a campaign called Fair Seas.
Fair Seas.
Fair Seas, and basically the aim of Fair Seas is to build a movement of ocean stewardship in Ireland for marine protected areas. and we're really campaigning for our governments to underpin these marine protected areas with robust legislation that isn't just words on a page, but actually translates to effective conservation measures.
Yeah. And if you take our island of Ireland,
Yes.
our ocean is, what, 10 times bigger than that?
So I don't know if everyone can see this map. I'll bring it down here. This is what we call the real map of Ireland. So this is Ireland, this is our land mass here. And everything in this black line is the Irish waters. It's within our EEZ. So this is actually 10 times the size of our land mass. And historically, the Irish government haven't paid too much mind actually to our oceans. It's kind of been sold out a little bit. But we have great potential here, because when you combine Ireland's land mass with our waters, we're one of the largest countries in Europe.
Have we the biggest water mass in Europe compared to other countries?
I
mean, Norway probably has. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it is the
But
largest, but we are certainly a contender.
We've more than Britain, presumably, have we?
Oh yes, yeah, more than Britain, yeah.
Okay.
Because this extends 200 nautical miles offshore. But when we're talking about protection and marine conservation in particular, and trying to give biodiversity a chance to bounce back, all of the Fair Seas partners, we crunched all of the data. We looked at whales and dolphins, seabirds, commercially exploited fish species, shark, skates and rays. We looked at seabed features like zoster beds, everything you can think of. We compiled all of this data in a big report called Revitalising Our Seas. Because when we overlaid all of this data from every taxon, these 16 areas, time and time and time again, came up as significantly important for biodiversity, because the biodiversity overlaps in certain areas. So when we talk about marine protection, climate change, it isn't great, don't get me wrong, things are not wonderful. But if we can make a really concerted effort to meaningfully protect these 16 areas where all of this biodiversity overlaps,
And so
it'll give it a chance.
Are they presently protected?
No.
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 Are any of them protected?
Very, very few. Up until last year, only 2.13% of our marine environment, taking into consideration it's one of the largest in Europe, was protected. Before Christmas just gone, the government thankfully announced a new area of protection that I think was a couple of thousand hectares. So it brought our average up to 8-point-something% protection. Now, under EU legislation, we were supposed to have 20% of our maritime area protected by 2020.
And why are we not doing this?
Because it's not a priority by the government.
Are there
It
vested
should be.
interests blocking it, or why?
Well, historically, our government has focused on our agriculture. So we need to come away from that and look at this wonderful resource that we have. There's a new deadline by Europe. 2030, we have to designate 30% of our marine environment.
Right.
But we must be careful not just to designate, but actually effectively manage.
Yeah.
Because there is no point protecting something on paper if it isn't actually meaningful.
This is really all very interesting, and
Yeah.
now I think we should open this to everybody.
Yeah.
I think we could talk for hours.
Oh,
by the way.
100%.
Thanks, Phil.
I like to look at the map,
Yeah.
and just for kind of context, Dublin, we're here.
Yeah.
As you can see, it is a really important area for seabirds, for whales and dolphins, particularly our smallest species, the harbour porpoise. But you mentioned the hope spot, the Great Skellig hope spot, which extends from Kenmare Bay in Kerry to Loop Head in County Clare, which is here.
Yeah, that one. Okay. Is that protected now?
No. not an Irish law. It's recognised internationally as a hope spot. The hope spot is led by Dr. Sylvia Earle. It's now internationally recognised as a very important area for biodiversity. But we are waiting for the government to legally define what a marine protected area is in Ireland and make sure that that is underpinned in our legislation. That legislation is actively being written and looked at and contested in the Dáil, but it's not in place yet.
But now, Dublin Bay Biosphere, just before I move to open this to the audience, that's just beside us here,
Yeah, oh yeah.
What's the state of that, and is it being properly protected?
I love that word, properly protected.
Well,
Because no,
effectively protected.
no, it's not. Nothing in Ireland is effectively protected. But it's a start.
Okay.
And we're getting...
Okay, this is really, so I think it's time now for opening this to audience for questions, and thank you, and if everybody can answer these, it would be great if we could.
Short question in relation to the whales.
Yes.
So to what extent does whaling, industrial whale, have an effect, and how has that been lessened recently, resulting in increased numbers?
Oh yes, so historically, and there was whaling stations in Ireland, there was quite a large one in Mayo. The historic whaling wiped out 90% of most species of whales. If you consider right whales, they're called right whales because they were the right whale to hunt. They were easily to hunt.
Right.
Their global population was decimated by 99%. We're starting again to see a slow return in these whales because whaling is now banned in most countries, barring Japan and some parts of Norway. Yeah. You're not allowed industrially whale in Ireland.
No, what I meant by the question in a way was, is that a slight break on your good news that actually these increased numbers is related to reduced whaling?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, I mean, if we never had industrial whaling, you could argue that climate change mightn't have been as bad as it was because whales are a great carbon sink, If we can get those numbers of great whales back up to pre-industrial whaling numbers, that would be amazing to see.
So I think, yes, what I mean is there is certain things happening that are protecting and that are successful, and I think it's important to bring up these successes too, yeah?
I just wanted to ask, the protecting the sea areas, what does protecting from what? What does it mean exactly?
So marine protected areas, there's many things that we're trying to protect from. So industrial fishing, particularly bottom trawling, is particularly destructive on the environment, but also busy shipping lanes, trying to mitigate ship strikes, for example, noise pollution, can be reduced, or even other human activities like high areas of people on jet skis, So it depends on the area what you would be protecting it from and for how long.
Oil and gas exploration would be one
Oil
of
and
the-
gas exploration, funny enough, it's universally recognised that we need renewable energies, and offshore wind is a large part of that. But you also have a lot of considerations where to put offshore wind farms to not negatively impact biodiversity.
I was thinking more of the oil and gas exploration and the problems of the noise being released.
Yeah.
How serious is that problem?
Very serious, because through oil and gas exploration, basically they let off explosions off the back of a boat to see how deep the seabed is. And whales and dolphins live in an acoustic world. They rely on their hearing. If there's a big bang, they get a fright, and they come up to the surface too quickly. And just like if Nina did that, they get the bends. They get air in their lungs.
So it's really serious, the
Really
damage
serious.
of oil, which should be banned everywhere in the world, shouldn't it be? We are in climate crisis, and we're
It should
still...
be banned. It is mitigated by having people like marine mammal observers on board. So, there's mitigations for everything, but yeah.
Hi, I'm just wondering, do you know any update on Margaret on our super trawler? Because it's obviously taking dolphins plenty as we speak.
Yeah, and I mean, that's a really good point as well. When you look at the likes of those super trawlers, the bycatch rates are phenomenal compared to a smaller industrial boat. And the last update that I heard on that particular vessel was that it spent most of its time steaming through Irish waters and not actively fishing. And you can track vessel activity on marine traffic as well. But the last I heard, it was mainly steaming, so not actively fishing. Yeah.
But it could be actively fishing, though. I mean, is
It
there
could.
anything to restrict it from doing so? Are there any laws to prevent it from doing so?
Yes, there are strict laws. But again, how well those laws are implemented is a different question.
Okay. These are great questions, by the way. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, in regards of resources, right? Let's say that all of this implemented in terms of paper and legislation and so on.
Yes.
Do we have enough boats actually to cover all these areas? Do we have drones, military drones that goes there? Do we work with the communities, the fishermen communities, to go out there and protect these areas because they will need it actually for the catching of their own fish?
Yeah.
We have France bottom trawlers actually coming into our REC. We have the Russians doing drills. And then we needed actually to deal with them until one fisherman from, I think, Cork just went and tried to face them bravely. So what's the story here? What happened after this? Because we're going to get involved, but I want to know what you know.
Amazing question and such a good point. Like, when the legislation is enacted, what does that mean for people on the ground? And that's why I spend quite a lot of my time in coastal communities, because the coastal communities, particularly fishers, are going to be key if these are to work, because nobody knows their area better than locals.
And by the way, are they in favour of these protected, like typical fishermen around the coast of Ireland, do they understand what you're doing and that these areas, for their sake, would be better to see them protected?
The majority, yeah. And I think it comes back to that cultural heritage that our Irish people have to their environment. I think when you oversimplify things, people get scared that they're not going to be able to, fishing is their livelihood. And I think people get afraid that they're absolutely not going to be able to do that. And that isn't the case. So any fishers that I've spoken to and had an actual proper, conversation with, they're, 95% of them are implementing it anyway. They know where the fish spawn. They know when to not fish there, So yeah, it's quite welcomed. There's always one or two, but,
Yeah.
I guess that's the advantage, is you're kind of creating like safe grounds for nurseries and then for spillover of fish right into fishing.
Exactly.
areas.
And that's why these 16 areas are so important, because if we protect these areas and if the fishing community get on board, you'll have a spillover effect. So, okay, you might not be able to fish here, but the fish are going to spill out over here and you're going to have 3 times as many.
Yeah.
It'll take a few years, but yeah, that's the idea behind it. And it
Makes a lot of
people are
sense.
getting on board.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, we've some more questions, and I know time is running too, yeah?
Is the government doing anything to try and stop the fishermen who are shooting the marine birds and seals when they get too close to the nets? Because, one, it's really bad for the sea due to all the plastic from it, but also they're killing the marine birds and the seals who are just trying to get the fish, which is in their own home and seas.
Yeah, shooting like, yeah. So that actually is quite an issue, particularly still in Kerry, with seals, because there is a very broad opinion that seals are competing with their food source. It's not true. A lot of seals don't actually eat what the fishers are trying to catch, and when they do, it's because there isn't enough food available. Their preferred prey isn't there. Again, I think that's awareness and trying to educate the communities on what actually is happening. But it's illegal. Marine mammals, including seals and seabirds, are protected under the Habitats Directive and the Birds Directive in EU law. So you can be prosecuted for shooting seals and seabirds, or whales and dolphins in Ireland. again, can be and are different things.
Has there ever been a prosecution?
For shooting a seal? Not to my knowledge in Ireland, no. It would be very difficult to prove.
Okay, but still it hasn't happened that there's been a prosecution. So really there's no enforcement.
There has been prosecutions. The MPWS in recent years have successfully prosecuted people for shooting raptors and things like curlew and other waders, which are also protected. But seabirds and the likes of seals, not yet.
Yeah.
Just two more questions, and we can chat after. Remember, there's drinks.
Yeah, and the questions are brilliant. They really are great questions.
You mentioned that the legislation around the MPAs was being, discussed at the moment. So is the Fair Seas Coalition involved in that?
Yes, yeah, I know. and that has been a really, this month is we've been working on the campaign in the back end for quite some time, but this month is the first year that the campaign has actually been up and running. And we have been at the table reviewing the legislation that the government are putting together, and to the best of the whole NGO community in Ireland, we're trying to fight the battle. But we do rely on the general public, using your voices. Don't underestimate the general public. If you're the one that makes the agenda for the government. Yes, you can sign up to the Fair Seas campaign. We have a website and we're on all of the social media. We regularly release information on the legal process that's ongoing, that's understandable, because sometimes they try with the jargon to make it so that you can't participate. But so yeah, definitely check out Fair Seas, and also the Irish Well and Dolphin Group. We have information on the process on our website as well.
Thinking of like sewage, wastewater, we have a lot of sewage that just goes straight into seas and stuff. And then for definition, like you'd like in legislation, would it be like no take zone, just completely leave it? Because I think it's important to
distinguish between them.
Exactly what it is.
Yeah. That's something that we're working on now, because a lot of people think that a marine protected area is a no-take zone. A no-take zone is a type of marine protected area, but there are several. So we're not asking for all of these areas to be no-take zones. Some of them will be, but mainly there'll be time area closures, particularly from a whale and dolphin aspect, because a lot of the larger whales that come to Irish waters are migratory. So we would be asking for time area closures where certain activities wouldn't be allowed at a certain time of the month or the year.
Yeah. Can I just ask before we finish, just from everybody in this room here, what do you think all of us could do to try and protect our oceans and to deal with climate change? The two big issues that we're facing. What is there something that we could do after this meeting to try and move this agenda forward?
Maybe I could suggest that we all sign up to the. I want to end on a positive note.
Yeah.
Sign
Yes.
up to our Fair Seas campaign,
Yeah.
and perhaps if everybody is suggesting some actions, it might be better if we take it to the refreshments area
And have more chats out here about it.
have more chats out there. But before, first of all, I want to say thank you to Duncan, Nina, Zoe and Shabelle. We could talk for hours, which is brilliant. But can I just ask, to make it simpler, your recommended action is sign up to Fair Seas.
Yeah.
Really simple. I remember Zoe, you said, I don't want to put you on the spot, and you can think about it, Nina, in terms of taking action. You told me about a great website monitoring your own.
Yes, I use, I don't know if anyone here has heard of like Geeky Zero, Giki Zero. I use that. It suggests actions. Some of them are things I'd never even thought of, and I think that really helps, and they're small things. And then the other thing I've recently adopted is to seek out positive environmental news, because sometimes you're like, why am I doing all these small actions when it's like the news is so negative? So I'd say try and subscribe to something where you're receiving positive climate news, and then look for small steps and engage with your local politicians. That was 3 things, sorry.
I agree.
Nina, any recommended action?
I mean, these are great ways to go about it. For me, it's to personalize your relationship with your immediate environment and grow that so that you become a beacon for positive engagement, I suppose, and that you become a means of spreading, you know what I mean, how beautiful it can be and the need for its
How
protection.
beautiful it can be. What a great way to finish. Thank you to everybody. Let's continue the conversations at the drink session.